I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz is a person of enormous controversy these days, and sadly, from my perspective, the object of a media derision, from CNN to the New York Times, Washington Post, to such bastions of progressive ideology as The View, even Saturday Night Live, where their entire open a couple of weeks ago was devoted to depicting Alan in the bowels of hell, along with Jeffrey Epstein, where the devil, played by Kate McKinnon, simply wanted to meet Dershowitz and interview him on her own podcast. And there was not one clever line in the entire skit outside of the devil saying she invented podcasts. That doesn't mean the audience didn't laugh throughout the skit. And that's because SNL was preaching to its own choir, its own base of people who now despise Alan Dershowitz. And why is Alan Dershowitz now the most reviled constitutional lawyer in America? Because he dared to act on principle. Alan Dershowitz's sin, his impeachable crime, was that he agreed to argue against the impeachment of Donald Trump on constitutional grounds. And is always the case, Alan was extraordinarily effective and persuasive, which of course compounded his crime. By the way, there are actually JBS viewers who've sent me harsh emails criticizing me for having Alan Dershowitz on. Here's a sample of a JBS viewer email. Rabbi Golub, with all due respect, your support of Alan Dershowitz is deeply disturbing. Although Dershowitz is credible in his general support of Israel, his apparent support and aid for Trump is despicable. Dershowitz, by helping our president, is only adding fuel to the fires of intolerance. There's a frightening mob mentality within the ranks of those who loathe Donald Trump, and Jews are right in the middle of that mob. So much so that they believe Alan Dershowitz is adding to the fires of intolerance in our country. You know, most people know and acknowledge that politicians on both sides of the aisle drip with hypocrisy. They say one thing when defending their own party members, they say the exact opposite when accusing members of the opposing party. That's why most Americans have lost all trust and faith in politicians of both parties, Democrats and Republicans. And that's also how most Americans feel about the media, which tends to be partisan and biased. Few today live by the transcending ethical principle of Judaism: what is hateful unto you, do not do to your neighbor. What people who hate Donald Trump are willing to do to Trump, or to anyone who gets near Trump, like Alan Dershowitz, are things they would never tolerate if they were done to a president whom they cared about. So pervasive is the cancer of Trump hatred that Jews who are part of the mob are willing to tear asunder principles by which they've lived their entire lives. And then there are the courageous few among us who have the strength to tell the truth, even when it contradicts the mob, even when, more importantly, even when the mob includes people who one likes and respects and admires, and who just a few days ago used to be a good friend. Alan Dershowitz has been a leading liberal advocate of civil rights and human rights and constitutional rights for some 5 decades. During his high-profile career, He has defended numerous people charged with heinous crimes. He's often criticized as being someone who his only goal is to be in the public spotlight. But he is clearly motivated by a sense of conviction and principle. And the fact that he's defending his understanding of the Constitution and that he refuses to abandon principle because the object of attack is Donald Trump is to his credit. And it is unconscionable to try to silence him or to turn him into some kind of social pariah in the Jewish community, which is why I have asked Alan Dershowitz to be on JBS many times, will continue to do so, and his constitutional argument against impeaching Donald Trump on the charges brought by the House does nothing to change my regard for his lifelong contribution to American life. And so I'm most pleased to have on our JBS phones now from Miami, the former Harvard Law professor and author of the book, Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of #MeToo, Alan Dershowitz. Alan, thank you again for joining us. And how in the world are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. My mother would have loved your introduction.
That's good. Alan,
these days, those introductions are rarer and rarer. You know, you read an email from an angry listener. That was one of the more intelligent emails.
Yes.
It was actually quite thoughtful. You should read the emails I get. You would not believe some of them. And, of course, if the shoe were on the other foot, if Hillary Clinton had been elected president and she were being impeached on precisely the same grounds, and I would be making precisely the same arguments, I would be beloved. People would be building statues to me on Martha's Vineyard. But I have never, ever refused to take the shoe on the other foot test, and I pass it, unlike my colleague Larry Tribe, for example, whose constitutional law depends completely on who's in office.
Yes.
22 years ago, he said a president can't be charged with a crime if he is sitting in office. And as soon as Donald Trump got elected, he woke. And he said, oh, no, I was wrong then, I'm right now. Of course a president can be prosecuted. Look, academics change their mind. I changed my mind about some issues in this case, too. But I did it based on research, not based on partisan leanings. And so, you know, I'm getting a lot of criticism. And the worst part of it is people are making up stories. For example, I said on the floor of the Senate that if a president does something completely lawful, but it may be motivated in part by his desire to be reelected, and he thinks his election is in the public interest, you can't turn that lawful conduct into something unlawful because he wants to get elected.
Okay, Alan, I want to interrupt you because that was going to be my first question. And I told Alan before we went on camera, my goal here is to give him an opportunity to answer questions people put to him all the time and then don't give him a chance to answer. And Alan, I watch you go on The View. I watch you go on Chris Wallace. I go even on CNN, and questions are asked of you. You never get a real chance to answer. Anyway, that's my goal here. And I want to play right now the clip you're referring to, because the question that you're being trashed with is your statement about what seems to be, the way it's stated, Alan, is that you're saying that a president can do anything the president wants to do if the goal is his reelection. I want to play this clip, then I want you to give your explanation for what you meant and how what you said has been taken grossly and unfairly out of context. But let's play the clip first, Sloan.
Every public official that I know believes that his election is in the public interest. And mostly you're right. Your election is in the public interest. And if a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment. I quoted President Lincoln. When President Lincoln told General Sherman to let the troops go to Indiana so that they can vote for the Republican Party. Let's assume the president was running at that point. And it was in his electoral interest to have these soldiers put at risk the lives of many, many other soldiers who would be left without their company. Would that be an unlawful quid pro quo? No, because the president, A, believed it was in the national interest, but B, he believed that his own election was essential to victory in the Civil War. Every president believes that. That's why it's so dangerous to try to psychoanalyze a president, to try to get into the intricacies of the human mind. Everybody has mixed motives. And for there to be a constitutional impeachment based on mixed motives would permit almost any president to be impeached.
Alan, that was your quote. You talked about mixed motives, presidential rights. Explain what you meant in overall context.
Well, first, the sentence before that, which nobody ran, but just before that, the same answer, was that, of course, if the president does anything illegal or unlawful, that would be impeachable conduct. I spent the first hour of my talk arguing that you need to have a crime or criminal-like behavior akin to treason and bribery for a president to be impeached. So the main thrust of my argument is that if a president commits a crime or anything unlawful or even criminal-like, he can be impeached, and I favored the impeachment of Richard Nixon for that reason. They always took that sentence out.
Yes.
And so the next sentence was about motive. I was asked about what if a president does something that's perfectly lawful, essentially, but his mixed motive, one of his motives was to get himself reelected. And basically my point was that mixed motives can't change lawful conduct into unlawful conduct. The implication is also that mixed motives couldn't turn illegal conduct into legal conduct. So the people who said I said a president could do anything were just totally distorting what I said. And they were doing it deliberately because, they're smart enough to know. Jeffrey Toobin was my student. He's smart enough to know that I wasn't saying a president could do anything. Larry Tribe was my colleague. He's smart enough to know that. But they just dissembled and distorted in order to make a point. And on the floor of the Senate, Adam Schiff, Schumer, all of them repeated the lie, it's a lie, that I said a president could do anything. They did it quite deliberately for partisan gain. And I think it hurt them with the senators because the senators were there and they heard me say what I said. None of them interpreted it as saying the president could do anything he wanted. They all interpreted it the way I intended it. But then the media distorted it, and then it got back to the Senate, and then the senators distorted it. And I think they lost their credibility with the honest senators, the ones who actually heard me say what I did say, which was perfectly reasonable.
Absolutely. By the way, for someone to believe that Alan Dershowitz was arguing that a president could do anything he wanted, including illegal acts, you would have to assume Alan Dershowitz was an idiot. And for all the people who criticize you, Alan, for all the people who criticize you, no one says you're an idiot.
Well, worse than an idiot, Joe Lockhart said on CNN that what I said could have been said by Hitler, Stalin, or Mussolini. And it would be a support for genocide. It's so absurd when I spent all of my time saying a president couldn't commit any illegal act. Somebody else said, under my theory, a president could go out and shoot his political opponent or arrest all the Democrats or, a series of hypotheticals, all of which I totally disputed. But, when you tell the big lie and you tell it often enough, people believe it. And people wrote to me saying, oh, my God, you're such a terrible person. You think a president could do anything? Somebody who I've known for 30 years wrote to me and said he can no longer have a social relationship with me. It was one of the best things in my day because the guy was the most boring man I had ever been with, and I had been tolerating him for 25 years. Now I have no reason to have to tolerate him anymore. But, for 30 years, a guy knows me. He's asked me advice and help on his kids and grandkids, and suddenly he hears on television that I said something like that, and he cuts off his social relationship with me completely. People are so angry at each other that you can't have dialogue. You can't have a serious conversation anymore. If you say anything, they'll distort it, turn it around, and turn you into a pariah. I'm writing about this, obviously. I'm actually publishing a book called Defending Democracy, which is my speech in front of the Senate, the answers to my questions, and a few op-eds I've written about it. So if anybody hasn't heard my speech, this book will contain my speech. It'll contain reference to how you can get the YouTube, listen to it, my questions, all the questions. You can hear it for yourself and make your mind up. I had to do that because otherwise people will persist in believing that I said something that A, I don't believe in, and B, is extremely dangerous. You know what the most dangerous thing about, they call it now on the Senate floor, this was made up by Adam Schiff, he calls it the Dershowitz doctrine, that the president can do anything. What I'm afraid of is because the president's getting acquitted, obviously, that people will believe that this case sets a precedent for what was called the Dershowitz doctrine, which I don't even believe in. And it will create the ability for people to say, oh, my God, the president can do anything. That's what the Senate ruled. And if they do that, don't blame me, because I don't believe in that doctrine.
I know.
Blame Adam Schiff, blame Nadler, blame Schumer, blame all those on CNN and others who have persistently lied about what I said and turned it into a doctrine that could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's the most dangerous part of it.
Well said. And by the way, you heard me talk about this mob mentality. And a mob mentality is what's trying to run right over you now. And the things they say are so not only hateful, but and obviously untrue. But I worry for what you worry about. And you know, it's interesting. Alan, I want to make sure I say this on JBS. I can understand if people think Donald Trump should be impeached or people think he should not be impeached. You can argue one or the other. You can feel he is a terrible president. You can feel he's not a terrible president. This discussion with Alan Dershowitz has nothing to do with that. This has nothing to do, in my mind, with Donald Trump. What upsets me is a process and abandonment of principle that we see articulated by Alan Dershowitz, but it could be articulated by any one of you, were you not part of a mob mentality. And I wanted to know your sense, Alan, when you hear me talk about a mob mentality, whether that resonates with you or not.
Yes, because I lived through McCarthyism.
Yes.
I went to college in 1955. I was president of the student government at Brooklyn College. And Brooklyn College was firing professors who had taken the fifth in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. And I really began my political career defending the rights of Professor Slockower and others at Brooklyn College against the mob mentality. And in those days, if you defended somebody, you were deemed to be a supporter. I was very anti-communist. I grew up in a household where Stalin was the second most hated person after Hitler.
Yes.
And I hated communism, but I defended the rights of a professor to take the Fifth Amendment. And the president of Brooklyn College would not write me a recommendation for law school because he thought I was a commie simp or a pinko, even though that was the furthest thing from what I actually was. So I remember the mob mentality back in the 50s, but that came from the right. Today it comes from the hard left and even the center left. Senator Schumer is part of this problem. And Congressman Nadler is part of this problem. And Congressman Schiff, they all willfully and deliberately lied about me for partisan advantage. And these were people I admired and, worked with, but I have no admiration for them whatsoever. For them, the ends justify the means, and the ends can be the most notorious. I mean, these are guys who actually fit into the Dershowitz doctrine, which I don't believe in. These are guys who are saying they can do anything. They can lie, they can commit perjury, they can distort as long as they think it's in the public interest to do so, and they think it's in the public interest to get rid of Donald Trump. So they're prepared to lie and cheat in order to do that, and that's pretty despicable.
That is perfectly said. Okay, I want to
I'll give you another example, one more example.
Sure.
So the day after I made my speech, I was invited to go to the White House. This was previously. I'd been invited well before this to be there when the president unveiled the peace plan. I had worked on the peace plan, and I think it's a very good peace plan. I don't think the Palestinians will accept it unless they're pressured to by the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Emirates and others, but I think it's a good peace plan. So I was very proud to be there. You should see the criticism I got for that. How dare you go to the White House? See, you really are a Trump supporter. Even if I hadn't been a lawyer in this case, I would have gone to the White House. I was there I've been working on peace plans since 1967 when I worked with Arthur Goldberg at the UN on UN Resolution 242. I worked with President Clinton. I worked with President Obama. I conferred with President Bush about peace in the Middle East. I'll confer with any president who wants to bring about peace in the Middle East. But now I'm criticized for that because even if the president recognized Jerusalem, recognized the Golan Heights, if this guy did it, if Trump did it, it can't be good.
Right.
That's the attitude that many people have. And for me, being a bipartisan means I support a president who I voted against if he does the right thing, and I oppose a president who I voted for if he does the wrong thing, as I did with President Obama. I voted for him twice. And then when he pulled that shtick at the end of his tenure of allowing the UN to condemn Israel's occupation of the Kotel and the Jewish Quarter and the Hebrew University and the Hadassah Hospital access roads, I condemned him for it. That's my definition of bipartisanism, and I'll continue to work with President Trump, even though I voted against him, if he helps Israel and continues to do good things for peace in the Middle East.
At one time, Alan, what you just articulated is what every liberal Jew you and I know would have applauded. And that's what hurts me. And I don't know if the audience fully understands or appreciates my orientation. What hurts me is that I have this idealistic view of who the Jewish people are, that they don't join the mob, that they are able to see when the emperor has no clothes, and they don't go along with a mindless criticism that is wholly partisan. And what you have articulated is what I believe at one point was the ethic and the mindset and the principles that energized liberal American Jewry. And what pains me, Alan, is all that seems to be lost because this hatred of Donald Trump has robbed Jews of all reason and also principle. Your thoughts?
But not only Jews, everybody.
Yes, I know.
It's not limited to Jews.
Yes, I'm just upset with
everybody.
the Jews.
You can't have a reasonable, rational discussion. Look, we've discussed this before. Places, synagogues, the 92nd Street Y, other places, don't want me to speak anymore. I was one of the most sought-after speakers in the Jewish community because they don't approve of my views, and I'm going to continue to express my views. I'm too old to change my way. I've expressed these views repeatedly. I developed the shoe on the other foot test when I was defending Democrats in Bush versus Gore. I thought the justices of the Supreme Court, the 5 majority justices, didn't pass the shoe on the other foot test. That if the case had been Gore versus Bush rather than Bush versus Gore, at least some of them would have voted the other way. And so I apply my test equally to Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, but that's no longer acceptable. Today you have to choose sides. And if you're on one side, you're despised by the other and vice versa.
Yes.
And it's just very bad for America. And I think that Schumer and the other congressmen, Nadler and Schiff, are hurting our country. They're hurting our country terribly by first lying, repeatedly lying, because they think the ends justify the means, and then calling for an impeachment when the constitutional criteria for impeachment haven't been met. I would be making the same article if Hillary Clinton argument if Hillary Clinton were the president, and she were being impeached for the same crimes. But then, of course, everybody would be on the other side. Everybody would be on different sides.
Alan, what about the criticism? You are a sort of high-profile ambulance chaser, that you relish defending the O.J. Simpsons and the Mike Tysons and the Klaus Van Bülows because it will put you in the public spotlight, enhance your public recognition, might even get you a book deal. And so it's you are criticized for the style of whom you would represent. What's your response?
Well, that's because people don't know who I represent. 90% of my cases involve ordinary folk. 50% of them are free. People loved me when I defended Natan Sharansky People love me when I've now been trying to work on behalf of that young woman in Russia who is being held for 7.5 years for a minor offense of which he's probably innocent. People don't know that I helped get Menashe Levy out of Ethiopia, or that I helped to get Rubashkin out of prison, or other people. Most of my cases involve poor people. I've represented a lot of women who have no money, who have been abused by their husbands, who have been sent to mental hospitals by their husbands. In one case, a woman had her daughter taken away because she left her husband for another woman. Most of my cases on a daily basis are pro bono. I work pro bono for Aleph, which is a great Chabad organization that tries to improve the situation with Jews in prisons all over the world. And I love working with Aleph, and I spend a good deal of my day doing that. Of course, by definition, the high-profile cases are the ones that people know about. By definition, you don't know about
of course,
the many more cases in which I represent people who are obscure, who have no money, people on death row, people who've gotten excessive sentences, people who have been accused of crimes they didn't commit. Representing a woman now in Queens who was falsely convicted of a murder, and I'm trying to get her out of prison. So these are cases that are my daily fare. The OJ type cases I do once every few years. And
I understand, but I want to push you just a little bit, because the people most people do not know all of this remarkable work you do that would make them very proud. But they would still say to you, how do you determine, Alan Dershowitz, whether you will or will not defend someone accused of a heinous crime?
Mostly I do it by asking myself the question, what will the reaction be if I do it? And if the reaction is that people will hate me for doing it, that always inclines me to do it. I want to always represent the people who are the most despised, who are the most hated. Where did I get that from?
Judaism, that's where.
I'll tell you, indirectly. Elie Wiesel sent me to the Soviet Union in 1974 to represent Jews and others who were in prison. And in the Soviet Union, no lawyer would ever represent anybody who was unpopular, who was unfavored by the government. And that's when I decided that my life's work was going to be representing those who nobody else would represent, those who were so despised and so hated that people will hate me for doing it. And so I've done that. I've done that all my life. And if you call me and I know that my representation of you will create all kinds of animosity, both for you and for me, that's usually a good criteria for me taking the case. It's not the only criteria. I like to take cases that, will help make the law, will help improve the law, will help change the law. Obviously, if I think there's been an injustice, that's a criteria for me taking the case. But if you're hated and me taking the case will make me hated, I'm going to take the case.
Okay. Is it because you're chasing fame, Alan?
No, most of these cases nobody's ever heard of. I mean, most of these cases I don't need any more fame. I don't need book deals. I have publishers coming to me, knocking down the door, trying to get me to publish books with them and do things of that kind. So I don't need fame. That's the last thing I need. I mean, I think of myself, my spiritual advisors, from the past are obviously beginning with Abraham, arguing with God over the sins of Saddam. And if we move to the modern age, John Adams, representing the Boston Massacre killers, the people who killed Americans in Boston, the most radical place for the revolution. He was hated, despised. His own cousin, Sam Adams, wouldn't talk to him. It almost ruined his career and his private life. But he did it because he wanted to show the king that in America, everybody has the right to be represented, even if you're a British soldier who's fired on American patriots. So I've always tried to emulate the great figures in history that would stand up on behalf of the most despised and the most hated. It's so easy to represent popular people. So easy. I turn those cases down all the time. But when you're defending the most despised, that's the greatest challenge. Look, if I were a brain surgeon, I would take the hardest cases, not the easiest cases.
Yes.
I'm a lawyer, and I'm an accomplished lawyer. I've won a lot of cases. And so I can pick and choose among my clients, and I'm always going to pick the cases where the people are the most despised, most hated, most controversial, and most need to have a zealous defense.
I hope everyone hears you. Look, I assume you saw the SNL skit on you?
I didn't see it, but I was told about it. I was told I was in the...
Anyway,
the biggest criticism was that the guy who played me wasn't particularly funny.
Oh, he wasn't funny
I have
at
a
all.
good
No.
sense of humor, and I don't mind being mocked. It's okay.
Anyway,
but
let me ask you a question, though. Because thrown into that, it starts with you in the Senate and ends with you in hell with Jeffrey Epstein. You've received enormous criticism over not only defending him, but you helped him win a very positive, from his perspective, plea agreement in which Epstein was allowed to plead guilty to 2 prostitution charges. He only had to serve 13 months. He was permitted to be in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail, where he was given work release privileges that enabled him to be out all day. He only had to return at night to sleep. The deal also squashed an FBI investigation into whether Epstein was operating an international sex trafficking organization. And to compound the matter, a woman who brought charges against Epstein claimed that she was directed to have sex with you, which ultimately led to your writing your book, Guilt by Accusation, the challenge of proving innocence in the age of #MeToo. I want to give you a chance to say anything you want about the fact that what's thrown into the mix all the time now is Dershowitz and Epstein.
Yeah. Well, I did nothing wrong with regard to Epstein. I was introduced to him by the Lady Rothschild, who said he was a great guy and he was a major contributor to Harvard. He had built the Harvard Hillel along with Leslie Wexner. The only thing I knew about him was that he was giving money to Harvard and running seminars in Harvard, and I joined some of those seminars with the president of Harvard, the provost of Harvard, David Gergen, some of the most eminent, distinguished Nobel Prize winners. And as the moment that it was exposed that he was doing terrible things, my relationship with him ended. I did become his lawyer, but that was a professional relationship. He then paid me for every second that he spent with me. And I did, along with many other lawyers, Ken Starr, Roy Black, we arranged a deal for him because the government didn't have any evidence of a federal crime. They only had evidence of a state crime. So we ended up with a good deal. That's my job. I certainly don't want to end up with a bad deal. Once I take a case, I want to do the best I can for my client. I'm not interested in helping the government win their case. If the government didn't do a good job, that's a complaint against them. As far as the woman is concerned, never met her, never heard of her. I have emails from her admitting she never met me. I have a tape recording by her lawyer admitting that it would be impossible for me to have met her and that she's wrong, simply wrong. I have a draft manuscript that she wrote in which she admits she never met me. She claims she saw me once talking business with Jeffrey Epstein but never met me. She never claimed she had any sexual contact with me until she met her lawyers who told her there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. From the day I met Jeffrey Epstein, I have had sexual contact with one woman, my wife. I don't hug, I don't touch, I'm not that kind of guy. And it was totally disproved. The government, the judge struck it. The lawyers who brought the allegation withdrew it. It was all over, and it was gone. And then came the Me Too movement, and it got resurrected. But the evidence didn't change. It only got stronger on my behalf. So, I did nothing wrong. I'm proud of everything I did in relation to Jeffrey Epstein. I did my job as a lawyer, the same as I would do for anybody else who was accused of any serious crime, and I got the best deal I could get. And I didn't act inappropriately with regard to any person ever in my life. So I have
Did you have a social
of.
relationship with Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, it was an academic relationship, and it was way before anybody knew anything. The president of Harvard had the same relationship. The provost of Harvard had the same relationship. David Gergen had the same relationship. Nobel Prize winners had the same relationship. We all had the same relationship. We went to seminars. Occasionally, he would have meetings at his home. We went to his home. My wife and I visited him, and my daughter. But it was nothing inappropriate. He was just another kind of donor to Harvard who had interesting seminars that I went to. The day he was accused, that all ended, and I never saw him again, except in a legal relationship. And once the case was over, my total relationship with him changed. And the only time I took his phone calls after that was when he asked me questions about the case, and a lawyer is obliged, obviously, to answer questions if he's represented somebody. So I did nothing wrong, nothing different from what I've done for 100 clients, and there was nothing to even suggest that he was doing anything wrong. We never saw an inappropriate photograph. We never saw him in the presence of an inappropriate woman. If I had done anything like that, I would have, if I had seen anything like that, I would have terminated any kind of relationship with him. He was much, much closer to Leslie Wexner, obviously, the owner of the Limited and Victoria's Secret. He was much, much closer to the various deans and presidents and others at Harvard than he was to me. And yet I'm the one who's been attacked because this woman came out of the blue and falsely accused me. My goal is to see this woman in prison. I'm suing her. She's made over $1 million now from other people making false charges. He made false charges against Tipper Gore, Al Gore, Bill Clinton. She said she met the Queen. Totally nonsense. She said she was in a sex orgy. Apparently, it was reported at least with Stephen Hawking. I mean, just bizarre stuff.
That's
and yet
bizarre.
People continue to believe her. She said she was 14 years old when she met Epstein. Her own employment record showed that she was 17. And, she said she had sex with George Mitchell, the majority leader of the Senate, Bill Richardson, the United States ambassador to the UN, Leslie Wexner on multiple occasions, Marvin Minsky, the inventor of artificial intelligence. You name it, she had sex with them. That's what she says, and there'll be a trial, and it'll all be proved false. And look, I don't know who she had sex with. I know she never met me. I never heard of her.
Mm-hmm.
Was never in the same place as she was ever. So that will all be proved at a trial.
I am sorry you've had to go through this. Alan, very quick.
I was 75 years old when all this started. I was hoping for a very peaceful retirement, and then along came Jeffrey Epstein, and then Donald Trump. So my retirement has been anything but peaceful, or even a retirement. It's been difficult.
Although I have to tell you, Alan, I watch you when you're on, these various shows. I watched you, Super Bowl Sunday. There you are with Chris Wallace. You look like you're 60 years old and you can go forever. So good for you. We should all be your 80, Alan. Anyway, a couple quick more questions about the impeachment. And I do want you to come back to something you referenced, because you said, look, Tribe once had one position, then he has another position. Schumer had one position, he has the opposite position. The other, not Schiff, but
Nadler.
Nadler had one position, he has the opposite position. And lo and behold, Dershowitz had one position, and now he has another position. And there are people who are criticizing you because you said during the days of the Clinton impeachment that it was not necessary for there to be a crime. And your whole point in front of the Senate this time has been there must be a crime. Explain to me explain to me how you would answer anyone who would say to you, Alan, you are no less hypocritical than the people you charge, like Tribe.
Well, they changed their views on purely partisan grounds. I changed my views because I did more research. In the Clinton case, that wasn't an issue, whether you needed a crime, because he was charged with a crime, perjury. So I was on Larry King, and I hadn't done the research, and I was just asked the question, and I just accepted what was then the academic consensus, that you don't need a technical crime. By the way, I still don't think you need a technical crime. It has to be criminal-like behavior akin to treason or bribery. So I haven't changed my mind on that, but I have changed my mind generally because I've done more research, but it wasn't partisan. I was on the same side both times. I was against impeachment both times, not like Tribe, who was against it before he was for it, and Nadler and Schumer, who were against it before they were for it. I've always taken the same position. Academics do more research and they change their mind. I've changed my mind on a lot of subjects. I changed my mind on race-specific affirmative action over the years. I've changed my mind on torture. I've changed my mind on a range of subjects. That's what academics do. It's a very healthy thing, as long as you don't do it for partisan reasons. And I didn't do it for partisan reasons.
Alan,
I'm a strong supporter of the Democrats,
Alan, what's your take on the argument that without the Senate's being able to call additional witnesses, that Senate trial is unfair?
Well, there shouldn't have been a trial at all. Let's assume this was a criminal case and somebody was charged with abuse of power or dishonesty. Those aren't crimes. You make a motion to dismiss at that point, and the judge has to grant it. The other side can't come in and say, yeah, but we have evidence. We have evidence. No, if you don't charge a crime, you don't get to present the evidence. And if you don't charge an impeachable offense, you don't get to present the evidence. And as some of the senators said, one of them quoting me, no matter what the evidence is, you can't convict somebody of abuse of power or obstruction of Congress. There are no such impeachable offenses in the Constitution or under the rubric of high crimes and misdemeanors. So if my argument is correct about abuse of power and obstruction, then there's no basis for ever having a witness. I'll give you another example. Let's assume somebody in Mississippi today is charged with miscegenation, marrying a person of the opposite race. The prosecutors couldn't bring in evidence. Oh, my God, I'm going to prove to you one was black, one was white. No, you can't do that. There's no such constitutional crime as miscegenation, and there's no such impeachable offense as abuse of power or obstruction of Congress. So if my argument is correct, it follows logically from it that you don't have witnesses, certainly not in the Senate. You have it in the House, and maybe then you can change the charges and make them into constitutional offenses, but they didn't do that.
Okay. What about the claim being made by Democratic members of the House and Senate that if Donald Trump is acquitted without additional witnesses, the acquittal will be a sham and Donald Trump will forever bear the guilt of impeachment?
That's just a false argument. They can't have it both ways. On the one hand, they say impeachment is just like an indictment. You don't have to hear both sides. It's enough to hear one side of the evidence. You don't have to cross-examine. It's nothing more than an accusation. And then they say that even if he's acquitted, the accusation still stands. What if a person is indicted and then he has a full trial and a jury of 12 within 5 minutes comes back and says, you're innocent, you're not guilty? Does the indictment still stand? No, the indictment doesn't still stand. So if he is acquitted, in my view, it's as if he's never been impeached, particularly since I think the acquittal would be based on the fact that these were not impeachable offenses, that it doesn't rise to the level of impeachment. So I don't agree with Nancy Pelosi trying to have it both ways. On the one hand, denying the president the basic fundamental due process rights that you would have to be convicted of something, and then saying, even so, the impeachment then stands. Impeachment and trial go together. It's one process. It's not a separate process. There's no such thing as having been impeached if you've been acquitted. By the way, the same thing would be true of Bill Clinton. I don't think it's proper to say that Bill Clinton was impeached. I think that has been erased by history. The same thing as Andrew Johnson. Now, still, historians will say they were impeached. That's a fact. But the stigma of impeachment should disappear with an acquittal.
I understand. House Leader Nancy Pelosi made an impassioned speech earlier last March when she opposed impeachment proceedings against Trump, saying the following: impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country. And I believe most Democrats, Alan, agreed with her. The impeachments of Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, both had bipartisan House support. Yet the principle of bipartisan House impeachment was completely discarded by the House and by Jews I know and love, who argued Pelosi was wrong when she called for bipartisan impeachment, and that partisan impeachment is wholly acceptable to them. I want to know your perspective.
Well, it's just dead wrong. Just read Alexander Hamilton. He said the greatest danger is that impeachment will be partisan, will be based not on the guilt or innocence or on impeachable offenses, but on the number of votes that each side, each party can get in the House or the Senate. That was the greatest danger. And Nadler pointed that out in 1988. Schumer pointed that out in 1988. And then in a completely partisan, hypocritical way, changed their view when Trump became the president. Nancy Pelosi, I think, was trying to do the right thing, and I think she was pressured into moving toward impeachment by the left of her party. It's going to hurt the party terribly. Party is going to suffer. I'm a Democrat. I feel bad about it. The only people who are going to benefit from it are the hard left anti-Israel wing of the party. they will benefit from that. But the center of the party will be hurt terribly, I think, in upcoming elections. And I think the Democrats have shot themselves in the foot, much the way the Republicans shot themselves in the foot when they went after Bill Clinton improperly in 1998.
It just is strange to me that it was obvious the House was a partisan proceeding and the Senate was going to be a partisan proceeding, and that it's silly to say one is fair and one is not fair. Alan, you've said many times on CNN, on Fox, and on JBS, you are a lifelong liberal Democrat. You voted for Hillary Clinton. Yep. You have no love for Donald Trump, but you seem to be comfortable in his presence. You were highly flattering of him when he introduced his policy to extend civil rights protections to Jewish college students who were victimized by BDS. You supported his policies on recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, moving the U.S. embassy there, to his recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, to saying that Israeli settlements do not violate international law. And now you've said you are pleased with his peace plan that you worked on. To Jews who hate Donald Trump, to Jews who hate Donald Trump, your support of Trump policies is viewed as a form of political treason. What's your response?
Well, first, I oppose many of his policies. I oppose his immigration policies, his health care policies, his tax policies, his environmental policies, his gun policies, his attitude toward gay marriage, his attitude toward transgender, his attitude toward the right of a woman to choose abortion. The list of things I oppose is much longer than the list of things I support. But when I support a president's policies, I'm going to say that publicly, whether I voted for the president or not. And I think that's what the principles of bipartisanism require. I'm going to be honest about what I support and what I don't support. I'm not going to let partisan considerations play into that. I did the same thing, as I said, with President Obama, who I voted for, but was very much opposed to his allowing the vote to go through the UN, condemning Israel for the Western Wall and other places. So that's going to be my attitude going forward. It's always been my attitude. You know, you say I look like I'm 60, but I'm 81, and I don't change easily. And I haven't changed in a long, long, long time. I changed some of my views, but I'm not going to change my principled approach to how I decide important issues. And I know that will make me controversial and will make people despise me. You know, people love me when I support their views and support their political figures and defend people they like. And then they despise me. And they say, I'm so disappointed in you. I used to like you when you defended A, B, C, D. And I write back and say, you never should have liked me. You never should have admired me because you never understood me. I wasn't defending those people because I liked them. I was defending those people for the same reason I'm defending people you don't like. So if you don't understand me and my principles, don't either admire me or be disappointed in me. You don't understand me. And, you'd think people are smart enough to understand what it means to act on principles of the Constitution. I'm going to continue to do that. I hope I'm also acting on the principles of Jewish values in doing that. I try very hard to live by Jewish values and by American constitutional values. I might disagree with how it manifests itself, but those are my principles, and I'm going to stick with them.
I am so proud of you, and I am always glad that you have a platform here on JBS, and there was a big Facebook controversy, and Alan Dershowitz shouldn't be anywhere, and then somebody wrote, there's one place you can always see Alan Dershowitz on JBS. Look, I want you to sum it up with this last question. What is your advice to American Jews who have been lifelong Democrats and who truly believe in their hearts that Donald Trump is bad for America? And at the same time, you and I are saying there's principles involved that we hope that they embrace. What is your advice for them? Is there some insight you can give to people who are going to watch this interview, Alan, and are going to write me all kinds of hateful things because I had you on? What can you say to them that might give them some direction?
Well, first of all, I thank you for your courage in having me on, despite the opposition by some people. Look, I'm writing another book now called Why I Left the Left But Couldn't Join the Right. I can't support the Ilhan Omars and others in the squad and the hard left and Bernie Sanders of the Democratic Party, but I can't ever join the right because I support a woman's right to choose and gay marriage and the entire liberal agenda. So, I feel politically homeless, and I think a lot of centrist Jews feel politically homeless.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the Democrats to nominate a centrist candidate. I don't know that's going to happen. We'll see. But I could never, under any circumstances, vote for Bernie Sanders, and we'll see what happens. But I have no specific advice. Everybody has to follow their own conscience. But just my advice is live by principles. Always ask yourself, if the shoe were on the other foot, what would I be saying? That's the test I apply to myself, and it's the test I apply as a guide to whether I think a person is being hypocritical. And unfortunately, we live in the age of hypocrisy, and we live in the age of partisan extremism, and it's a very uncomfortable time.
Yes, it is. And I feel for you, and I am constantly
I'll
amazed
fight back. Feel for my family is suffering more than I am because I have a thick skin. But, my family is very hurt by some of these things and very upset by some of these attacks. People used to praise me all the time when I did what they liked. And they quickly turn on a dime when my same principles move me in directions they don't like. That says more about them than it says about me. So I understand that. But, this is a difficult time for my family. And my wife's been a source of great strength, and my children have. And we'll fight this. And I just will always stick to my principles. That's my goal in life as I get older.
Good for you, and I do not doubt that you will be wholly successful. Alan, thanks again for giving us so much time to let me ask you the questions. Everybody's asking and you never get a chance to answer, and I appreciate you so much. I'll see you back in New York when you're here. All the best to you, and just keep fighting the good fight, Alan.
I will do that. Thank you.
Thank
Be well.
you.
Bye.
The thoughts of Alan Dershowitz, who has been unfairly pilloried for nothing more than standing up for principles which one day could save a president who was as beloved as President Trump is now hated. And one day, his principles could save you and me as well. My thanks as always to our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golub, technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.